Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on this special Generation UCAN webinar. I'm your host, Varun Sriram. Today, we're going to be chatting about off-season nutrition. Oftentimes, we really focus on nutrition when we're training for an event or during the peak exercise months, but it's easy around the off-season, around the holiday time to let that slip, especially when there's not a specific goal that you're looking towards in terms of a race or in terms of training. But nutrition is paramount year round, and perhaps most important during the off season in order not to lose a lot of the gains that you've made while you're training during the season. I'm joined by a very credentialed co-host, our registered dietitian, and a sub 3 hour marathoner herself, Michelle Hearn. Michelle, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Byron.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you joining us. And I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart and something you have a lot of insight about, both from personal experience as a runner who's really pushing to get the most out of their training, as well as with clients that you've worked with. So off-season nutrition is something that has certainly been near and dear to you. And I think something we really want to highlight the importance of to everybody that's on the line with us today. Now, we certainly want to open this up to as many questions as you guys have as well. So at any point using the GoToWebinar app, feel free to shoot us a question and we'll get to it, whether it's pertaining off-season nutrition or just, pertaining to general nutrition in terms of training and racing, and then also implementing UCAN into your training and racing. So we could certainly get to everything that people want to chat about today, but the beginning of the discussion at least, we'll focus on the importance of nutrition during the off season. And with that, Michelle, I think a good place for us to start, which is something that's really going to be paramount to our discussion, is the importance of controlling blood sugar, and especially, I guess, controlling blood sugar during the off season. So to start us off, Michelle, what is blood sugar, and why should we be conscious of it? Why should we care about keeping it under control?
Yeah, so we all have a certain amount of glucose or sugar circulating through our blood at any time. So in that, keeping our blood sugar stable, when we do that, everything in your body functions better. Your mind is gonna be more focused. You're going to be able to perform in any type of activity at a much higher level. And keeping your blood sugar stable also ensures that you have consistent energy and that you're able to utilize body fat for fuel. So it's very important, obviously, when you're doing any activity. But of course, when you're not doing activity, you certainly don't want to be storing fat, and you still want to keep your mind really sharp. So it's pretty much important, all the time.
And in terms of the way that people feel when blood sugar is in control, how does that manifest itself when you have these ups and downs in your blood sugar and you don't have it under control? What might you expect to feel?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of us can relate. They call it the hangry feeling when your blood sugar is really low. As a dietitian, I call that low blood sugar zone, the I can't make good decisions zone. That's when you're tired, you're irritable, you become very snacky. A lot of people crave foods that are very high in fat or high in sugar. Those cookies, donuts, things like that. So it makes it very hard to make good decisions, and also just to feel good. Like I said, you usually feel tired and irritable. When your blood sugar is really high, you tend to feel pretty good initially, but then those highs are always followed by blood sugar crashes. And anytime your blood sugar increases, it's not very good for your body, because your pancreas is going to secrete a hormone called insulin, which basically tells your body, like, hey, we've got all this sugar, don't burn fat, burn sugar. So you're going to be storing a lot of calories as fat. Then you subsequently crash. So you feel really good for a little bit, then you're telling your body to store fat, and then you feel really awful.
So as we talk about blood sugar, and you alluded to it, Michelle, but blood sugar in the brain, if we look at the slide on the screen, so much making good choices, good nutrition choices in the off season is tied into your mindset and your mentality. How does this spike and crash effect, this up and down in blood sugar, affect your brain?
Yeah, so when your blood sugar is low, it makes it extremely hard to focus. And also, it's this very similar when it's high. And like I said, you might feel good for a very short period of time. You might be almost like hyper focused. But then when you come down, it's going to be very difficult to concentrate. A lot of times it's hard to process. A lot of people notice when their blood sugar is low, they have difficulty. They may be thinking something, but they have difficulty saying it or processing it. So it makes it really difficult to perform at your job at an optimal level. It makes it difficult to even just think clearly. So, in order to keep your brain, functioning at an optimum level, you definitely want to keep your blood sugar as stable as possible.
So Michelle, like overall, from a nutrition standpoint, if people are thinking about foods, and we stress that controlling blood sugar should always be a goal, but highlighted in the off season, if people are thinking about meals and snacks and pairing foods together, what should they be thinking about in terms of foods that help regulate and control blood sugar?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question I get quite a bit of. So I'm a huge fan of eating foods that are going to satiate you, make you feel not hungry, but not cause those blood sugar spikes. So I think first of all, it's important to understand what does cause those blood sugar spikes. So things that cause blood sugar spikes are going to be, foods that are very dense in sugars or dense in processed carbohydrates. And anytime I say processed carbohydrates, I am referring to something that doesn't grow on the ground or on a tree. So, bagels, crackers, there's no bagel trees. So, those are the things that really spike your blood sugar and really cause your blood sugar to crash. So things that are going to keep your blood sugar stable are foods going to be like foods that are higher in protein, foods that are higher in fats, and, some of our low sugar like vegetables and potentially low sugar fruits. And of course, Generation UCAN that's where UCAN comes in, because it's a fantastic in not only controlling, your cravings, but it's going to keep your blood sugar stable while giving you steady energy.
So, Michelle, speaking from personal experience, you just had spent the last several months training really hard and gearing up for the Portland Marathon, which, on a tough day, I believe 3:02 ended up being your time. Is that correct? Pretty.
3 hours and 9 seconds. So
Wow,
yeah,
3 hours and 9 seconds. I'm cheating you, Michelle. I'm cheating you a minute
I
51.
know.
I apologize. So,
That's all right.
very, very impressive time, and congrats again. But personally, how did carbohydrate intake overall? I don't know if you have it dialed down to a percentage or much more so based on feel. How did that differ for you, say, in the months leading into the race compared to what your carbohydrate intake and your nutrition has been like, here over the last 3, 4 weeks?
Yeah, so now I'm actually just in the last few weeks kind of gearing up into training again, but especially initially, right after the few weeks after the race, and even beyond that, when I'm not training as much, I definitely like to reduce my carbohydrate intake, and I definitely don't do it to a percentage, but I'm pretty in tune with what foods kind of make how I feel. I really in the last several weeks focused on having a little bit more fat, a little bit more protein, less carbohydrates with my meals, as opposed to having, let's say, like, an apple with peanut butter. I might just have a little bit of extra UCAN. So I was really focusing on, keeping foods, eating foods that weren't going to spike my blood sugar at all.
What's interesting though is, for you coming up as a runner, certainly the the whole idea and thought process behind controlling blood sugar probably wasn't prevalent, say, when you were thinking about your training nutrition and your off-season nutrition, a decade ago. You have any insight where you could speak to that? Like 10 years ago, if you were coming off a race, what was your nutrition like then before you had an understanding or focused on the importance of keeping your blood sugar steady?
Yeah, I used to, gosh, I would say as recent as 5 years ago, I ate an extremely high carbohydrate diet. I mean, I had bagels and bananas and pancakes, and for lunch I'd have a sandwich, granola bar, cookie, lots and lots of carbohydrates. Because I had always been taught, and every article that I read said that these, carbohydrates were what I needed to fuel my running, so I wouldn't bonk. And so even, during the season, I might eat a little less in the off season, but I actually tended to restrict fats. I tried to follow a more low-fat diet, kind of a low-fat, moderate protein, really high carbohydrate diet. Yeah, just like I said, as little as 5 years ago, I was doing that.
What have you noticed as you've switched over now in the off season? Do you feel like even when the training isn't high by virtue of your diet, you're not say, losing as much of fitness, or any insight into how your overall fitness has differed coming off an off season now compared to 5 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. So, I'm more fit now than I ever have been in any time of my life. And I absolutely contribute that to, not only training really hard and making sure I'm doing the little things to take care of my body like rest, but my diet, and I'm a registered dietitian. So, it's just 5 years ago, when I thought I was doing everything right, I really, but I wasn't hitting the times I wanted to, and I wasn't recovering. And I noticed, I was training up to, 70 or 80 miles a week, and I wasn't really leaning out. And it didn't make sense to me because, you read so much about calories in and calories out. And if that was true, I certainly should have been leaning out. So, now I follow a much more moderate fat. I eat a lot of nut butters and coconut oil, a lot of grass-fed beef, and I still eat, some sweet potatoes and rice, but I always have UCAN. I usually run first thing in the morning, and I actually just right before I got on this webinar, I did my second run for the day. So I always have UCAN, about 30 minutes before I run, and then if I'm going to run later in the day, or if I've had a workout, I'll have it post-run. And then I often have it in the middle of the afternoon. Because before, 5 years ago, I was having lots of, like I said, bananas and other snacks. And every time I was eating those snacks, like you're seeing on this slide, they really decrease your ability to use fat for fuel. So not only was I not, burning fat, I was spiking and crashing my blood sugar. So I was constantly, not really feeling great, but not training at an optimal level. And I was teaching my body how to store fat versus burn fat.
So this is great insight, Michelle, and it's interesting to hear, the evolution that you feel you've gone through in your fitness, but it's also interesting to hear your perspective as a registered dietitian. Like you mentioned, 5 years ago, thinking you were doing everything right from what you had read and what you had been traditionally taught, excuse me, to sort of taking a second look at that, reevaluating it, and now you feel a lot better. So I think. Overall, what we're going to discuss over the course of the next, 30 minutes, 45 minutes is kind of going to make a lot of people think here, because in a lot of cases, it might be similar to what Michelle said, and it might be very, very counterintuitive in some ways, or different than what you've always read and what you've always taught. And we'll certainly get into the science and try to give you a better understanding of why we're saying some of the things we're saying.
Yeah, Aaron,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
did really want to say quickly, you actually said what I was wanted to just say one more thing is that it seemed absolutely counterintuitive to me when I first heard about, I first heard about UCAN and I first heard about, eating more fats and more proteins versus more carbohydrates. I was extremely skeptical. And so I totally respect and understand people if they're listening to this being like, oh man, what have I got myself into? But, I encourage you to really listen and really, listen to our science today. And of course, you're always welcome to do your own research. And I'm sure Barton will give you my email at the end of this. But it's absolutely changed how I'm able to train and recover. And, I've PR'd in everything from the 5K to the marathon. So it's really powerful stuff.
So let's go ahead and talk about nutrition overall, and talk a little bit about it in the context of the off season. So before I get to what you're seeing on the screen, for many folks like yourselves who are on this, who are active folks, when we talk about this idea of the off season, that doesn't mean that workouts stop, exercise stop, activity stops. That simply means that you might not be gearing up for a race, whether it's a half marathon, a triathlon. So you might not be putting in those long, 2-hour runs. If you're a triathlete, those 4-hour brick workouts on a weekend. You're still training, but the training volume and the training mileage has gotten lower. Now, a lot of the folks that are on here that are familiar with UCAN, very likely one of the first reasons that you might have got turned on to UCAN was the idea that it would be able to sustain your energy and keep you feeling nice and steady throughout a long workout. And that's by virtue of controlling your blood sugar. And certainly that's a key aspect and a great benefit of fueling with UCAN. But what we also want to convey is there's a huge opportunity to hit, to make fitness gains and overall performance gains just by regulating your blood sugar, even when you're not doing those long duration, workouts where you need that steady release over a long period of time. So let's identify a couple nutrition issues that anybody who's working out, or active may be able to relate to. Number one is the difficulty eating prior to an early morning workout. For a lot of folks, that's very difficult simply because of time. You don't wake up early enough to have the time to put something in your system, or you don't know what to put in your system that'll agree with you, where it won't hurt your stomach and mess with your workout. There's also that aspect of, a lot of us work out after work. You may eat lunch at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and then coming into the afternoon, 4 or 5 hours later, you're going into your workout and you haven't fueled. And finally, for all of us, sitting at our desk at work, 3 o'clock in the afternoon rolls around, you may feel that hunger at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't know what to have. People gravitate towards sodas, sugary energy bars during that time frequently. Even late at night after dinner, you're hungry. What are most people eating? Chips, candy, things like that. So there's a huge opportunity in all of these situations, which are very relevant during the off season, to control your blood sugar and to regulate your blood sugar. Michelle, let's kind of hit each one one at a time. What is kind of the issue that people will face if they don't eat prior to a workout first thing in the morning?
Yeah, so I know I personally run first thing in the morning, and I know a lot of people who run first thing in the morning. So, if you run in a fasted state, like let's say you just get up, get some water, and run out the door, a lot of people say, oh, I do that because I want to train my body to burn fat, and we know if you're running in a fasted state, you're going to be burning a ton of fat. But, the longer you run, if you're going longer than 20 or 30 minutes, your blood sugar is going to start to get very low. And it's pretty stressful on your body. And then when you finish your run, your blood sugar is low, you're going to be really hungry. It makes it really difficult to finish your run and make good nutritional decisions. It's also extremely difficult to keep up the intensity of a run when you haven't eaten anything prior to a run, because you don't have any glucose coming in, because you've also obviously fasted through the night. So, yeah, do you want to keep going through these, or do you want to just finish talking
Yeah,
about
no,
this?
I think what you said there is very applicable and relevant to even the second point. If you're working out late in the afternoon and haven't eaten, like Michelle just detailed, you may hit a lot of those same issues. Now, what about that just outside of the workout? That mid afternoon feeling of hunger that a lot of us get sitting at our desk, or even that nighttime feeling of hunger. Say sometimes an hour after we've eaten a meal. What would you often say are the determining factors or causes of feeling that hunger?
Yeah, that mid-afternoon hunger, a lot of people tell me they do pretty good at breakfast, not lunch, and then around 3 o'clock they start to feel hungry. And a lot of time people, like you alluded to earlier, they don't know what to eat. So they may grab a granola bar or whatever's in the office, candy, all honey-covered nuts, donuts, whatever's sitting out. And anytime you do that, of course, you're going to get a blood sugar spike and a subsequent crash. And then you're going to be, by the time dinner rolls around, you're going to be even more hungry. The same thing with nighttime hunger. Like a lot of people, I would say most clients I work with, eat a decent breakfast, an okay lunch, and like I talked about earlier, they'll either have a quick snack or they may not eat anything. So they have a long period of time between lunch and dinner. So by the time it's dinner or the evening, they're just starving, and so they'll binge and they'll eat a ton of calories, and then the cycle will repeat over the next day. So, controlling your blood sugar in all of these situations is going to make a huge impact on, the nutritional choices you're going to make, and of course on your body composition and your fitness in the off season.
So what's kind of interesting, and if we look at this graph, Michelle, I'll have you walk us through this in a minute. But
Sure.
for me and for many folks, the banana was always kind of that common pre-workout snack that was always told to have before a workout. Used to have it before basketball practice in high school. Later on, before rec league basketball games, just grab a banana and go do that before a run. It's convenient. You perceive that it's good for you because it's a fruit, right? But in terms of energy delivery and in terms of optimizing your ability to burn fat, what are we looking at here on the graph, and why may the banana not be so ideal?
Yeah, so what you're looking at is the increase and then subsequent decrease in blood sugar over time. The banana is the one in the square. So, let's say, you have a banana like 30 minutes before you work out, you're going to get this increase in blood sugar. And what that does is anytime you get an increase in blood sugar like that, your pancreas secretes a hormone called insulin. And insulin is a hormone that shuts down your body's ability to use fat for fuel. So not only have you shut down your body's ability to use fat, so now you're not going to be burning fat, then you're going to get a subsequent crash in blood sugar. So when you get that crash in blood sugar, it's going to make it extremely difficult to maintain the intensity of the exercise you're doing. And you're going to finish your workout feeling very fatigued. A lot of times people will say, that go on longer runs or longer activities will say, yeah, I just, I hit the wall, I ran out of gas. Some people even feel kind of dizzy or shaky. And then when you're done, when your blood sugar gets that low, your body actually releases a hormone called ghrelin that just says, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, feed me. So even if you didn't, work out super hard, that banana has subsequently caused you to not only not be able to burn fat, but then for your blood sugar to be really low. So it'll make it difficult to make good nutritional decisions post-workout.
And in some ways, what we see with the banana is almost similar to, in terms of the impact on the up and down impact on blood sugar, is almost similar to what you might see with the gel. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually a fairly similar graph to what we see in maltodextrin, which is in a lot of the gels and shot blocks and things like that.
So it's kind of interesting just to put it in that context, something a lot of people might not think about. This graph is slightly more involved, but let's take just a moment, Michelle, to talk through it, and then we can kind of get to a little bit more of the UCAN portion of the discussion and exactly how we might recommend to implement it in the off season. But we wanted to provide sort of this background context to our discussion, just some general overall science. You've mentioned this in a few different times, Michelle, but when you control your blood sugar, you're basically teaching your body to utilize more fat for fuel. Now, somebody who is really lean might say that, I can't see too much fat on me. I can't really use fat for fuel. Just give us the sense overall of how much fat we have available for fuel and how much carbohydrate we have available for fuel, and why we might want to rely and teach our body to use more of that fat.
Yeah, so all of us have a lot of fat stores. This graph is for a person that's about 150 pounds. So the 150-pound person has about, you can see here, about 110,000 calories. Mev Keflezighi, who is one of our athletes who just won Boston, he has 4% body fat, and he has about 40,000 calories. So theoretically, Mev could run for about 4,000 miles on just body fat. I mean, that's of course in theory, break bones and do other things before you can do that. But the kind of the take-home message is that we have a lot of stored body fat, even the leanest of us. And fat is extremely efficient. Like, our bodies are really, really good at burning and utilizing fat. But unfortunately, with our current diet, with all the sugars and flours and high glycemic fruits like the banana, we're not teaching our body how to use fat for fuel. What we're doing is teaching our body to shut down that unlimited store of fat we have and depend on our very limited carbohydrate stores. Because if you think about the marathon, we never run out of fat. We actually run out of stored carbohydrates. So, in the past, unfortunately, in order to really utilize fat effectively, you had to follow a very, low carbohydrate, low insulin diet, and you had to train at much slower paces. But we're going to talk about in the next few slides how, UCAN is, the first fuel that actually allows you to continue to burn fat even at faster paces. Even at race pace, you're going to be able to burn a ton of fat.
And what's interesting, is I think when some people traditionally might hear that you have less carbohydrates and it's easier to deplete your stored carbohydrates, they might have been approaching the solution to the problem as being, well, I just need to dump a bunch more carbohydrates in my body and do it more frequently, right? That's kind of the traditional approach people have operated under. What we're going to talk about here is if you're training your body to burn more fat, through your nutrition, which is really what we're going to focus on. There's certainly ways to train your body to burn more fat through intensity of exercise. Where we're sort of going to focus more on the nutrition side of things here today. But if you're training your body to burn more fat through your nutrition, then you're less prone to depleting your carbohydrate stores, and that's the whole idea. Both with controlling your blood sugar and implementing UCAN, both during training, heavy training, but also during the off season, is that it's a tool that's going to teach your body to utilize more fat and rely less on sugars and those fast acting carbohydrates. So that's something that's important to get across. So let's transition it here to UCAN for a moment. And before I really dive deep into this, let me just do a quick poll of our audience and see how many folks in here are familiar with UCAN, have used UCAN before, and how many newcomers we have to the audience. Michelle, while we let people answer this poll, it's always a good time to ask you how did you first hear about UCAN, and when did you start using it?
So I first heard about UCAN. I saw an ad on Let'sRun.com, and it had had Meb on there. And as a registered dietitian, I'm always interested in various products out there. And I was really curious because it was this here we had a carbohydrate claiming that it would allow you to burn fat for fuel, which is pretty counterintuitive to what I had known and what I'd been taught. So yeah, I did. I was very skeptical, but I went ahead and purchased some and tried it on a run, and was very successful. And tried it again because I thought it might have been a fluke. And after the third try, I was pretty much sold. So yeah, it's a phenomenal product.
That's great, Michelle. And so let's take a look here at our results. And so let us see here, results of the poll. We've got about 16% of you that have never used UCAN, good bulk of you that have used it more than 10 times or very familiar with it, and then another percentage of you that falls somewhere in the middle. So that's all good to know and very helpful. So let's talk a little bit about how UCAN pertains to this discussion, and let me jump back here for a minute. So as we talk about controlling blood sugar and the importance of controlling blood sugar, at the crux of the matter, the uniqueness of UCAN is that it's a carbohydrate that controls blood sugar, which is a very unique feature of carbohydrates, and especially carbohydrates found in your traditional sports nutrition products. But there's a backstory to all of this. So what you're looking at on the screen is actually Jonah, who's the son of our founder, and Jonah had a very rare blood sugar disease. So essentially, the way we all sleep at night is our liver releases glucose into our bloodstream, and it basically gives us a slow release of energy throughout the night. So it keeps us steady and keeps our blood sugar and energy steady throughout the night. Now, kids like Jonah, they had a genetic defect where if they consumed traditional carbohydrates, they weren't able to break them down and convert them into glucose to give them energy. But if they didn't consume carbohydrates, their blood sugar would get extremely low, and they'd basically get life-threatening low blood sugar hypoglycemia, which could result in seizures and is very dangerous. So really what was happening with Jonah and several of these other families whose kids were affected by this disease. By the way, the disease is called glycogen storage disease, and it's quite rare. It only affects about 3,000 kids in the country. But really what these families had to do was feed their kids 10 to 12 times a day every 2 hours in an effort to regulate and maintain their blood sugar. Now, what they were doing was they were actually feeding them regular Argo cornstarch that you can buy at the grocery store. They were feeding them this cornstarch every 2 hours around the clock in order to regulate their energy. The cornstarch had a slower burn compared to other carbohydrates, so it would actually give them that steady release of energy that they needed, but only over 2 hour periods. So Jonah's family, they were very proactive. They started a foundation, and they really wanted to look at nutrition therapies for this disease because gene therapy would have taken years and years and may not have benefited their son. So they were looking at nutrition therapies, and really what they did was they contacted the top carbohydrate researchers in the world at the University of Scotland, and they had them look at all different types of carbohydrates. And Michelle, I'll let you jump in over here. Eventually what they found was SUPERSTARCH. So what process did they go through to find SUPERSTARCH, and what's so special about it?
Yeah, so I know Jonah's parents actually went to the World Health Organization. I mean, they were looking for, like you alluded to, looking for help for the glycogen storage disease. So it took 8 years of research, and they went to the top carbohydrate researchers in Switzerland. We often have people ask, like, why do you guys use corn? Why don't you use peas or oats or quinoa? And they looked at everything. They looked at all different types of carbohydrates, and what they were looking for was something that Jonah could take and these kids with glycogen storage could have that would give them stable blood sugar for longer periods of time, ideally something that would keep them steady through the night. But what they found, taking non-GMO corn, and they put it through a 40-hour cooking and drying process, and all they use is heat, water, and pressure. You got to remember that the first customers were going to be these little kids with glycogen storage disease. So they didn't use any enzymes or chemicals or anything. It had to be really pure and natural. So that 40-hour cooking and drying process, what it does is it takes that really linear carbohydrate molecule and it makes it a really big branched molecule. And we all know that big molecules actually empty from your stomach quicker. So it's in and out of your stomach really quickly. So it's really easy on your gastrointestinal system. But then when the enzymes go to attack it in your small intestine, it's so big and branched that it actually breaks down really slowly. So that's what gives you that steady, consistent blood sugar over time.
So SUPERSTARCH is really what we call the carbohydrate in UCAN, and that's what makes it unique. And so, like Michelle alluded to, the cooking process that's applied to this non-GMO corn to create the SUPERSTARCH, that's what UCAN has the patent on. So that's what's really sets UCAN apart from any, and SUPERSTARCH apart from any other carbohydrate out there. It was actually determined to be an energy source that stabilized blood sugar and provided the longest lasting energy in these kids who really needed 8 hours of that steady energy to sleep through the night. It is non-GMO, non-genetically modified, gluten-free, and the carbohydrate is completely natural. And again, there's a lot of clinical research behind it because it was originally developed for kids with glycogen storage disease. Now, when we tried to move, and you look at this slide, how is UCAN different than regular cornstarch? We get that question a lot, and that's it's really that heat, moisture, cooking process that the carbohydrate goes through that sets SUPERSTARCH apart from regular cornstarch. Because remember, Jonah was taking regular cornstarch every 2 hours, but the amount he was able to take would only give him that steady blood sugar for 2 hours at a time. If he took more at once, it would dump into his system too quickly, and his body wouldn't be able to break it down. So that's really the uniqueness and what sets UCAN apart from regular cornstarch is there's the slower burn. So you could take, a similar dose of UCAN compared to a similar dose of cornstarch. The UCAN from a blood sugar stabilization and from an energy standpoint would last you longer than just the regular cornstarch because it's breaking down over a longer period of time. So really what we did was, the founders of UCAN started wondering, what impact would this have as we talked so much about the importance of controlling blood sugar in the first 15 minutes of this discussion. They wondered what would this carbohydrate do, for regular folks or even for runners, for athletes who, need to control their blood sugar, though they may or may not be aware about it. How would this impact them? So one of the first folks they contacted, which, looking back on it, was actually the perfect guy to contact, was a gentleman named Bob Seebahar, who was at the University of Florida, sports dietitian there at the time, and was also working with the U.S. Olympic triathlon team. And Bob's, Bob's very candid when he speaks, and he'll be upfront and say, I'm a recovering carboholic, and everything I taught and learned in my education and when I was getting, my nutrition education was all about, carbohydrates for energy and sugars and fast acting carbs. And more recently, Bob sort of was one of the forerunners and champions of this idea called metabolic efficiency, which is all about regulating blood sugar both during heavy training times and in the off season as a way to teach your body to burn more fat and ultimately to help you get in better shape. The better shape you're in, the more fat you're able to burn. So Bob was one of the first guys, that said everything you're saying is exactly what I'm trying to do with my athletes. Right now, the only way I can do that with them is by feeding them sugars every 20 minutes to regulate their blood sugar. If you have something that'll do it, without having to keep feeding and dosing and consuming so many calories, then that's exactly what I'm looking for. So that kind of sparked us, to go ahead and do a clinical trial at the University of Oklahoma, testing our carb against maltodextrin, which you'll find in virtually all of your popular sports nutrition products, Hammer, Cliff, Goo, Power Bar, all use maltodextrin as their primary carbohydrate source. And what you see on this graph is we're comparing a 25-gram serving of maltodextrin with a 25-gram serving of our carb, SUPERSTARCH. And 25 grams is what you'll find roughly in a packet in a serving of UCAN. It's roughly what you'll find in a gel as well, just for a reference point. And with maltodextrin, you see that significant spike in blood sugar, and 30 minutes later, you get that significant drop. And when you get that sugar crash, that's when, in the context of running and exercise, you feel like I need to refuel, and you might suck back another gel. Now, when you get that sugar crash, like we were talking about with the banana, just in the context of your day, that's going to be a signal to you that I need to eat again. When we have that blood sugar crash, that's when we might perceive that we're hungry, even if you don't have that actual stomach hunger. Your brain might be telling you, "Hey, I need to eat again because my blood sugar is low." What we see with SUPERSTARCH that's so cool is, first of all, there's no significant spike, so you don't really feel that huge surge. But most importantly, there's no crash, so there's never that rapid decline and drop in energy. It's just a nice slow breakdown over time. So what you're looking at is 2 hours later on the x-axis of the graph, your blood sugar is still stable, meaning your energy is stable. That 25 grams of carbohydrate in UCAN has kept your energy steady for about 90 minutes to 2 hours, whereas that same amount of maltodextrin 30 minutes later, you're saying, what's next? So that's one really significant aspect, just in terms of providing you long lasting energy, whether it's during your day or whether it's during your workout. Michelle, what about this graph? What are we looking at here and why should people care about it?
Yeah, so what we're looking at here, this is a clinical trial that we did at the University of Oklahoma, and it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. And what we did is we had cyclists cycle at 70% of their VO2 max for 2.5 hours, and they either ingested maltodextrin or superstarch 30 minutes before they started cycling and right after. And you're going to look on the y-axis here, and you're going to see a really big spike in insulin with the maltodextrin. And you're going to see a similar thing happen after activity, not quite as big of a spike, but certainly a pretty pronounced spike in insulin. And now if you look at SUPERSTARCH, we basically flatline insulin all throughout activity and then post-activity. But what does that translate into? So that's, yeah. Okay, so what that translates into, now we're the red line here, is that the cyclists were actually able to utilize, this is now on the y-axis, is free fatty acids in the bloodstream. They were able to utilize a lot more free fatty acids, not only during activity, but post-activity. And once again, that has to do with just, the ability to have that carbohydrate coming in, but keeping their blood sugar and their insulin levels very low. You're not spiking and crashing your blood sugar like you were with the maltodextrin.
So let's talk about that post-activity application of a carbohydrate like superstarch and the benefit of stabilizing blood sugar post-activity. If people have used and thought about UCAN, more in the context of their long run and using it before a long workout, they might not realize the benefit of using UCAN after exercise. This sort of highlights that a little bit more. But Michelle, again, if you could talk us through this, what are we looking at over here in that post-workout window with UCAN?
Yeah, so when you use UCAN post-workout, because anytime you spike your blood sugar post-workout, like you're seeing with the maltodextrin in the very first graph, what that translates into is you're not going to be breaking down as much fat post-workout. You're basically stopping your body from breaking down fat. But with the superstarch, you're keeping your insulin levels low. So anytime you keep your insulin levels low, you're able to burn a lot more fat for fuel even after exercise. And what we used to see is people would be taking in a lot of those maltodextrins and gels and things during exercise, and they would finish their activity with low blood sugar. They'd be really tired and fatigued. But when you're using UCAN before your exercise and during exercise, if your exercise is longer than about 2 hours, you're able to keep your blood sugar so much more stable during exercise all the way up to the end. So it doesn't really make sense to spike your blood sugar post-exercise if you're finishing with stable blood sugar versus when you used to use those sugar-based products and you'd be finishing your workouts with a lot lower blood sugar.
So we've talked a decent amount about the science. So let's get into a few nuts and bolts things over here, and let's really talk about who UCAN is going to benefit the most. Michelle, who do you and I know as you talk through this, it's going to be funny because we might say everybody, but who do you find that UCAN is going to benefit the most? Like, what are some situations people might be able to relate to?
Yeah, well, I'm going to come back to the first one, but beginner runners, people who haven't run in quite a while, I've been running for a really long period of time, but a lot of people when they're new to running or new to working out, it's if your cells aren't trained, your muscles aren't trained, you're really prone to those blood sugar crashes. And a lot of time those people too are the people that are going to have a bagel or banana before they work out, or they may not even eat before they work out. So they're really prone to, even more prone to blood sugar crashes. I've had a lot of people tell me too, like, oh, I only use UCAN for my my long run. I don't use it before my 30 or 45-minute runs. And my question to those people is why? Why not? One 80-calorie scoop regeneration UCAN is going to sustain you all the way through that, 4, 5, 6 mile run. And then you're going to feel much better afterwards. You're going to be able to make better decisions throughout the day. So, I always tell those people, don't trade dollars for dimes. Don't not have that 80-calorie scoop in the morning or in the, afternoon, and then overeat later in the day. So, all right. So let's go back to the first one. I worked with a lot of people who tell me like, yeah, I just tried so many different diets, but I really put on body fat easily. So those are the people, they tend to, they'll tell me like, oh, I really try to keep my calories low or my carbohydrates low. And anytime you keep your carbohydrates low, if you're following a higher fat or higher protein diet, you're more likely to be burning fat for fuel, but then your energy can be really poor. So, finally, these people, when they use UCAN, they tend to respond really well. So, because now we have a carbohydrate that's going to give them steady, consistent energy, but isn't going to have them store fat like they would if they use the goos or gels or even foods like bagels and bananas. I pretty much don't know any serious runner who's not prone to mid-afternoon hypoglycemia. When we're training hard, and most of us, myself included, don't have the luxury of just running and then having a personal chef or chilling out the rest of the day. We're running around, working, and doing other things. So using UCAN, and I travel quite a bit, I know you do as well, Varun, I always have UCAN about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and especially if I'm not working out. And I bet a lot of people on this webinar can relate. Sometimes on days that I don't work out, I often feel hungrier. And we all know that running and exercise tends to raise our metabolism and, can kind of suppress hunger. So I feel like sometimes on days I'm not working out, I'm just ravenous. So, I definitely want to make sure that I'm making good nutritional choices on those days. So, having that packet of UCAN, often I'll use the chocolate or the vanilla, the one that has a little bit of added protein in the middle afternoon. I really notice I'm able to have a much healthier dinner versus just entering, those 5, 6 p.m. hours just ravenous. People that go for long periods without eating, or you have a job, or you have situations. My second oldest sister is a surgeon, and she will take UCAN before her surgeries because she says, hey, if something goes wrong, I can be there at 6. She called me the other day. She had a 9-hour surgery. So UCAN is great if you know you're not going to be able to eat for quite a while. And a lot of people will even take our UCAN and make it into a meal replacement. You can add some healthy fats like nut butters or coconut oil, unsweetened almond milk. Also, you can add extra protein or other things like that, and it makes a really healthy meal replacement on the go. And finally, if you're in great shape, I mean, this isn't what we're the whole thing of this webinar, but you really want to take it to the next level. When you're able to burn fat and you're able to keep your blood sugar stable, you're not pulling so much carbohydrates from your muscle and your liver. If you recall that slide we saw, you really have limited carbohydrate stores in your muscles and your liver, and it's a really energy consuming process for your body to be replacing those. So if you don't have to be taking so much from your muscles and your liver, and you can burn more fat even at higher intensities, with UCAN, we've shown you can burn significantly more fat, even running at paces, 5:20, even under 5 minutes per mile. You're going to be able to recover a lot quicker. So UCAN is a great tool, even if you're, in elite shape and you really just want to take it to the next level.
So let's talk, Michelle. A lot of great stuff. So let's talk, and again, let's try to orient this towards the way people might be thinking in the off season when they're not, going out for those long, their long runs or running their 60, 70 miles a week. Let's start off with this first, the last thing you just talked about, with higher intensity. So this is, of course, just using one person as an example, but this is from a treadmill test from an endurance coach, Lance Leo, out at Lifetime Fitness in Minnesota, at St. Louis Park in Minnesota. And, as we look at the off season, a lot of folks' workouts might change from, being outside and doing those long bricks or for triathletes or those long runs to doing, shorter workouts, more high intensity workouts in the gym. And so what Lance actually did, he treated his body like a laboratory, and he wanted to test his fat burning using UCAN before a high intensity treadmill run versus Hammer Heed, which is a popular maltodextrin product, before that same high intensity treadmill run. And to put some context behind this, traditional exercise physiology says that at higher intensities, the body's going to burn carbohydrate and won't be able to burn fat. And of course, this was also a lot based on the fact that the carbohydrates that were being looked at were your fast-acting carbohydrates, your sugars, more so than something like UCAN, which keeps your blood sugar stable. What's really interesting is what Lance did. He ramped himself up to 10.9 miles per hour on the treadmill, which I think we can all agree is very fast, very high intensity. If the first thing we're going to look at is and my mouse keeps doing that. My fault. With UCAN at 10.9 miles per hour on the treadmill, if you can see where my mouse is, Lance showed he was actually burning 53% fat. So again, this is very high intensity when he took UCAN prior to getting on the treadmill. Did the exact same test a week later at 10.9 miles per hour on the treadmill with hammer heat at that same high intensity. He showed that he was burning only 12.7% fat. So again, to reiterate, at high intensity with UCAN, 53% fat. At high intensity with HEAD, 12% fat. Michelle, how do we make sense of this, in the context of what traditional exercise physiology has taught us?
Yeah, so, pretty much like what you said with the HEAD, traditional exercise physiology said, the faster you run, the quicker you're going to burn out of your sugars. You're going to burn through your sugar race. That's why they tell you, like, don't go out too fast in the marathon. You're going to hit the wall. And we see that. I mean, this is when you look at HEAD, that the HEAD graph, it basically says that, like, when you're using those maltodextrin-based products because you've spiked your blood sugar to some degree and you're really suppressing your body's ability to use fat for fuel. You're not really burning fat, and that trend continues as you go faster. With UCAN, you have that carbohydrate coming in so much more slowly. You have such a small muted insulin response that we see you're able to burn so much more fat for fuel, even at significantly faster paces. When I show this graph, I always say, how much longer are you going to be able to run when you're using UCAN and you're burning 53% fat? I mean, you're going to be sparing so much more of your muscle and your liver glycogen, and you're going to feel so much better. You're really going to feel good and consistent throughout your run. Versus with the HEAD, you're gonna feel pretty terrible. You're gonna burn through your sugars, and you're gonna have to be continually redosing.
So the workouts might change during the off season, and whether it's doing a high intensity treadmill run like this, or some of you folks might be more apt to go to spin class or boot camp in the off season just to mix it up and do different types of workouts that fall into those high intensity categories. You might be saying to yourself, especially if you're familiar with using UCAN for long distance, where does this fit into my 45-minute spin class or my hour boot camp class? And, I think what we're trying to illustrate with this graph is in terms of optimizing the results of those types of workouts and getting more fit, going into those workouts with a carbohydrate on hand that's going to stabilize your blood sugar and keep you steady throughout the workout is going to allow you to get better results, burn more fat throughout the duration of the workout, which is really what you want to do. How about UCAN on a non-workout day? Michelle, we've got a sample a meal plan here that maybe you could walk us through, in terms of using UCAN during a non-workout day. And then also I'd love to hear kind of with your own clients what situations you might recommend they use UCAN on a non-workout day.
Yeah, so, I used UCAN with most of my clients and myself included almost always in the morning. Research shows that if we're going to keep our blood sugar stable, if we keep our blood sugar stable in the morning, we have a significantly higher percentage, a chance to keep our blood sugar stable throughout the day, which allows us to perform better, be leaner. Overall, people that keep their blood sugar stable have better body composition. So this is something from Lifetime. Lifetime Fitness does a very high higher fat, high protein, lower carbohydrate diet. So, in this particular instance, they have for breakfast, they have the high protein, they have the hard-boiled eggs or Greek yogurt, some healthy fat with the walnuts, and then 1 scoop of UCAN with 1 scoop of dynamic greens. And dynamic greens is just like Lifetime Fitness's green product. Then for lunch, they have the large spinach salad, so you have your vegetables and your chicken. Once again, this is a very low carbohydrate meal plan. And then as a snack, they have, as opposed to a lot of people don't know what to have for a snack, as opposed to having a granola bar or something else that's going to spike your blood sugar. They have UCAN with protein, or of course you could certainly just use the the chocolate or vanilla UCAN that already has protein in it, because that's going to really sustain you and help you make better decisions as you go into dinner. And so, dinner they have the steak, butternut squash, 2 cups of broccoli, very high protein, lower carbohydrate. And for dessert, they have raspberries, which is a high fiber fruit.
So really what this is getting you to think about is not necessarily that to get the most out of UCAN, you have to use it at breakfast and as a snack. It's just kind of getting you to think of other opportunities that you'll benefit from using UCAN. So, again, like Michelle said, the really a lot of the carbohydrates in this plan are coming from the carbohydrates that are there in the vegetables, and then with UCAN being the primary source of carbohydrates. So, I think even with the breakfast, if you were to say just have the 4 hard-boiled eggs or the Greek yogurt without walnuts and skip the UCAN as part of that breakfast, what would be the difference, Michelle? What's sort of the benefit of adding UCAN along with that protein for breakfast?
Yeah, because is great is hard-boiled eggs. That is a great protein source. The Greek yogurt is too. But neither one of those really have a sustaining carbohydrate. So you're more likely to feel really hungry or have low energy between breakfast and lunch. Where the UCAN, you have this energy source, you have this carbohydrate, but it's going to be releasing so slowly. It's not, unlike other carbohydrates, it's not going to be teaching your body to store fat. It's a carbohydrate. It's going to give you steady, consistent energy, and you're still going to be, stay in a fat burning zone. Versus if you don't have the UCAN, you're more likely to feel less energy and then to potentially suffer from low blood sugar between breakfast and lunch.
I want to take it here to something that's going to be relatable to what we are just talking about in terms of clients that you've worked with, Michelle. And let me pull the screen back up here. You had a client by the name of Amy who you worked with, and Amy, kind of implemented. I know the off-season time is again, might be a time where people may focus on other goals. If it's not really just putting in the mileage, there might really be a fitness and a body composition element that comes into play in terms of what you focus on in the off season. How about for Amy? What did Amy do, and how are some of the things we've been talking about relevant with what she did?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when Amy came to me, she told me she wanted to lose weight. She basically grabbed her stomach and was like, I need to lose this belly fat. And her husband was an avid runner, so she really wanted to be able to run a 5K. She told me maybe a 10K, but a 5K. And, when we went through a diet, she was eating a lot of those processed carbohydrates, breads, bagels, and things. And she liked to work out, but when she worked out, she was pretty much working out on an empty stomach. I mean, she was of the idea, well, if it's 30 or 40 minutes, I probably don't need to eat anything. And she would go for runs, but she had a really sensitive stomach, so she didn't like to eat before she ran. And then she was kind of snacking throughout the day. She had kids, and so she'd kind of eat whatever they ate. So she was really eating very haphazardly, spiking and crashing her blood sugar fairly frequently. And so what I did with her diet is, we traded in those processed carbohydrates for small amounts of unprocessed, like real grown in the ground carbohydrates, those sweet potatoes, oatmeal, and brown rice. And I made sure she had adequate protein and vegetables with meals, because having those adequate protein and vegetables is extremely important, because those two things are going to help balance out your blood sugar as well. And we used UCAN. We used UCAN before and after every workout. And, a lot of my clients, too, I'll also use it either mid-morning or mid-afternoon. But for Amy specifically, we did before and after. And there's a before and an after picture from her. So, June 2013, she wasn't running more than 4 or 5 miles, got up to 6 miles. But then, within 5 or 6 months, it's October 2013, she ended up running her first half marathon. She lost over 15 pounds, over 4 inches from her waist. Update from her, she's run a full marathon. She's gotten a PR in her half marathon. She's doing fantastic. And all because she was able to make some dietary changes, and she utilized UCAN and was just able to keep her insulin levels low by eating those healthier carbohydrates and incorporating UCAN and keeping her blood sugar stable.
I wanted to see if I had your other client example on hand.
Sure.
I don't know that I unfortunately do in this deck. But what about your own sort of testimony, Michelle? We have a few questions actually about people sort of more so using UCAN during training.
Sure.
What about your own personal experience?
Yeah, I'll go through mine real quick. So, like I talked about earlier, so I ran in college, and then I wanted to transition to the half marathon and full marathon, and I was doing what I had read. Like I was eating lots of bagels and cereals. I was using, lots of gurus and gels and those maltodextrin-based products, but I just wasn't feeling good. I was still like hitting the wall in marathons, and I remember at the end of one long run, I actually had to sit down in my car. I was like that dizzy, sweaty, shaky. And so, once I heard of UCAN, I decided I was going to try it. And after experiencing it, I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm all on board. And so, my blood sugar level stabilized, my energy was so much better, and I actually started improving not only my workouts, my races, and and I leaned out as well. I got significantly leaner.
So what are we looking at then? This is kind of evidence of what you
So
just
this is
said,
yeah,
right?
this is my pre and post. So this is a race we have in Portland, Oregon. It's called Savi's Island. It's a beautiful half marathon. And in 2012, I was 10th place overall. I ran a 6:40 pace. Time of 1:27:28. But after using UCAN consistently for a year, I won the race. I came back the next year. I ran a 6:13 pace for a 1:21:31. And I've always been fairly lean, but if you compare the left to the right, you can tell, I definitely leaned out, and I was able just to perform better. When you keep your blood sugar stable and you're burning fat, you can work out at higher intensities and just become faster. It was really exciting. It's been a really exciting process for me.
So I want to again, for those that might not be familiar with UCAN, just take it back here, and just I realize that everybody might not know exactly what the product offerings are and the best way to use them. So there's essentially, two different versions of UCAN in terms of the SUPERSTARCH products. We also have a brand new hydration product called UCAN Hydrate, but that's a little bit different in terms of the sense it doesn't have any carbohydrates or calories in it, so it's not so relevant to the discussion we're having today about controlling blood sugar and how UCAN fits in. With the SUPERSTARCH products, there's the sports drink mix, which has 30 grams of super starch per packet. And we generally find that a 30-gram dose of our 25 to 30-gram dose of our carbohydrate is good in the context of exercise for about 90 minutes to 2 hours of steady energy. When you're using it, as we've talked about, using it, during the day, oftentimes it'll be able to keep your blood sugar stable for 3 or 4 hours. So that's something to keep in mind. With the sports drink mix, 110 to 130 calories per packet in terms of using it. Packet goes in about 8 to 12 ounces of cold water. You want to give it a good hard shake. The water isn't so paramount to how the product works, just more the amount of fluid we found yields the best consistency and taste. And really when to use it. It's that pre-workout snack. It's something that you're going to consume 30 minutes before your exercise rather than sipping on it slowly as a drink. And instead of giving you, again, that up and down spike and crash effect in blood sugar and energy, it's going to keep your energy and blood sugar steady and very consistent. It also, because it keeps your blood sugar stable, is going to allow your body to utilize and burn more fat for fuel. And that's, again, like we illustrated, whether it's high intensity, whether it's sustained long duration effort, we looked at kind of both examples, right? The long sustained duration was on the first science slides that we were showing with the clinical trial, where it was cyclists, for a 3 hour period of time. The high intensity was the treadmill test we looked at, where the gentleman was still burning 53% fat with UCAN at 10.9 miles per hour on the treadmill. So that's really the benefit of using it before any type of workout. And then again, using it as a healthy snack in the middle of the day, just as a way to stabilize your blood sugar at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or having it alongside as the carbohydrate portion of your breakfast. If you're having eggs and having a UCAN shake on the side, it's something that's going to extend the life of that breakfast by providing you with the carbohydrate that keeps your blood sugar nice and steady. Now, a lot of you folks, as we've been talking about these shorter workouts, might find that if you're a UCAN user and you have our tubs, for example, the serving size is slightly smaller. A scoop and a half from a tub equals one packet. So many times for that 45-minute workout or that hour workout, people simply use an 80-calorie scoop of UCAN, or they might use half the packet. So if you're working out for a shorter period of time, there's still a benefit to using UCAN. You just might find that you don't need to use as much of it. So I'd certainly recommend playing around with the dosage. But even in that case, you're still treating it as your pre-exercise snack and drinking it 30 minutes before. How about the protein UCAN, Michelle? Where does that fit in?
Yeah, so the protein you can, I really like to use the protein you can before workouts that are a little bit longer. I find the protein kind of curbs hunger in my stomach while the super starch gives me that steady, consistent energy. It's also great post workout. You get that same blood sugar stabilizing carbohydrate and then the benefit of protein to start the repair and rebuilding process. Also, I love, I talked about earlier, using the protein you can as a healthy snack, either mid morning or that 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's so convenient, it's quick, and it's a really good way to, keep your blood sugar stable and, keep you satiated.
With the protein you can, one of the best ways I like to use it is, like Michelle said, as part of that breakfast shake. So a very simple and delicious recipe would be either the chocolate or vanilla protein you can with, a cup or a cup and a half of unsweetened almond milk, which is only about 30 calories per serving. You want to get the kind without the sugar because we're focusing on blood sugar stabilization. Add a tablespoon of nut butter, which is a healthy fat. Again, the things that control blood sugar, outside of a slower burning carbohydrate like UCAN, which there really is nothing else similar to, would be proteins, fiber, and fat. So if you were to look at a shake with UCAN protein in it, you're getting your protein and your slow release of carbohydrate from the UCAN. The nut butter represents the fat, and then you might add, some spinach or some kale in it to take care of the fiber, and suddenly you've got a fantastic breakfast shake that not only tastes delicious, but is really going to set you up for that rest of the day to make smart nutrition choices, to make good nutrition choices, because you start the day off with steady blood sugar. Michelle, just from a dietitian's perspective, if you could just reiterate one more time, how important is it to start the day with steady blood sugar?
Oh, it's so important. Like I stated earlier, when you start your day with stable blood sugar, you're much more likely to have stable blood sugar throughout the day. And we have research that says that people who start their day with stable blood sugar are leaner than people who don't. And Brian just gave a great UCAN recipe for the morning. And I've noticed, as I travel and the busier I am, there's not really good breakfast choices out there. So much people I see in coffee shops, they're grabbing muffins and bagels and all these things that are really high in carbohydrates. Even breakfast sandwiches, are going to have that, high carb, high flour English muffin or bagel, which is really not setting you up for success throughout the rest of the day.
That's a great point, Michelle. Yeah, it's. I mean, I think, like you said, you nailed it. I mean, for anybody that travels a lot or that's busy, breakfast is the easiest meal of the day to screw up because, I mean, really, if you're eating breakfast outside, I mean, other than if you're going to sit down and have an omelet or something, almost everything you're going to get that's quick and convenient is going to be carbohydrate rich. And it's important to differentiate. UCAN and SUPERSTARCH are still carbohydrates, but they're the right types of carbohydrates. They fit in with this whole element of controlling blood sugar that you can also accomplish to some degree from, or you can also accomplish, excuse me, with proteins, fibers, and fats. But UCAN gives you another tool in your belt. UCAN is it's not always convenient to whip up protein, fiber, and fat snack on the, whether it's cheese and as your fat source and some nuts as protein. You might not always have access to those things. It might not always be optimal. So UCAN's another tool that you can utilize to control your blood sugar, especially when it's so paramount during the off season. We just had a couple questions on using UCAN for longer races. So I'll wrap up the off season portion of our discussion, hit one more point, and then we'll sign off for the night unless there's any more questions. But Michelle, if there was, we've kind of covered a wide range of topics, which generally happens when we do these. But if there were 2 or 3 takeaways people could, leave this with in terms of getting the most out of UCAN in the off season and thinking about it differently than their pre-run fuel for that 90-minute or 2-hour run, what would you want people to leave here with today?
Yeah, I would say some of the big points I'd really want people to leave with is, like I stated earlier, even for your shorter workouts, for that spin class or that, 30 or 40-minute run, like don't trade dollars for dimes. Don't skip your UCAN or have a banana or go in a fasting state. Like use a UCAN. Maybe use a smaller portion, like a half a scoop to a 3/4 scoop. but you're continuing to set your body up to be burning fat, keeping blood sugar stable, which is gonna keep you, fitter. It's gonna and leaner in the off season. So continue to use UCAN even for your shorter workouts would be my first point. My second point would be, if you, unless you're able, like you stated, to have a really solid blood sugar sustaining breakfast, UCAN is a great way to start your day. Either a UCAN shake or just have UCAN as the carbohydrate portion of your breakfast, because like I said, we know that people who start their day with stable blood sugar are going to be leaner than people who don't. And then also my third point would be UCAN is great either mid-morning or mid-afternoon as just a healthy snack. A lot of people kind of have their meals planned out fairly well, but when it comes to snacks can really get a little overwhelmed, especially we're busier nowadays than we've ever been. So using UCAN either mid-morning, mid-afternoon, or even later in the evening. I work with a lot of people who will use our chocolate UCAN at night with a little bit of unsweetened almond milk and some heavy cream as opposed to a sugar-rich dessert. And, you still get that like chocolate-ness and that, some of that tastiness, but you're going to get a lot less calories and you're going to get something that stabilizes your blood sugar versus a big dose of calories and something that'll spike and crash your blood sugar.
And what we may not have, highlighted enough is really a lot of this is you're going to notice it just based on how you feel. I love your line about trading dollars for dimes, Michelle. It's a great line, but it's so much easier to make better and smarter choices when you feel better. And it's an example that we see every day. I mean, even if I look at myself before this webinar tonight, it's kind of in that awkward time where 7:30, starting at 7:30 on the East Coast. Had lunch around 2 o'clock and was only going to eat dinner, here when we're done. And I was like, what do I do? What should I, like, I want to be alert. I want to be on top of my game when we're talking. And hopefully I say that, and hopefully I've been both. But, really it was a great time for me right there, 7 o'clock before we got started to have a packet of UCAN. And again, while my stomach now may be rumbling simply because I haven't eaten in 6 hours, mentally I don't feel that low blood sugar hunger. It's going to be much easier for me when this is done to make a smart choice with what we eat instead of saying, let me just do something quick and convenient and order Domino's or something like that. So that's really what you want to kind of pinpoint as you're playing around with using UCAN in different situations, is like, how does this make me feel compared to how I used to feel in this situation when I was either eating nothing or if I was eating something that didn't control my blood sugar, both from how do you feel in terms of energy and how do you feel in terms of focus and just overall cognition. I want to end with one last point that'll answer some of the questions on using UCAN for longer racing. And with UCAN, whether it's, again, I come back to what Michelle said, trading dollars for dimes, whether it's, it really comes back to and boils down to calorie efficiency. And if you look at this chart, our general recommendations are a packet of UCAN, roughly 130 calories, is going to last you throughout your 90-minute workout. And this covers both your pre-workout nutrition as well as your during workout nutrition. You similarly may think about what you do if you're using other nutrition for that 90-minute workout. You may have some type of bar, which ranges, around 150 to 200 calories as your pre-workout snack. And then during your workout, you're sipping on some type of sports drink, to sustain that blood sugar, because the bar on its own taken before the workout isn't going to do that. So you're having 300 calories to get through that same workout. Similarly, if you look at any of the popular gel recommendations, it's take a gel 15 minutes before and every 30 to 45 minutes during. So really for a 90-minute workout, they're recommending you take 3 gels at roughly 100 calories a gel, 300 calories. So the biggest thing to consider with UCAN is that we've always thought of calories as what we consume, because with our traditional carbohydrate-based fuels, we're primarily utilizing those carbohydrates for energy. With UCAN, even though you're consuming less calories because you're burning significantly greater amount of fat, we showed you in the example, again, to reiterate, the 53% of fat compared to the 12% of fat when we're talking about UCAN versus hammer heat. Because you're utilizing and burning more fat with UCAN, you don't need to consume as many calories. So that's really the beauty of it. You're making every calorie count. And I love this quote from Dr. Kathy Eckel that you see on this slide. And she says it's really the ability to maintain blood sugar that sustains energy levels. So from a fitness standpoint, UCAN is huge because it does that, meaning it maintains blood sugar without having to put lots of calories on board. It's really beneficial because you can make every calorie count. So really another application of UCAN, especially in the off season when the mileage is lower, is this idea of calorie efficiency. You're able to consume less and burn more fat and feel more steady throughout your workout without having to suck back a lot of calories just to get through it. So it's a big point to consider. And somebody here in the audience had asked us, it was Monty who would ask how you suggest using UCAN for your longer workouts and something over 4 hours. So Monty, what we really say is that with UCAN for anything longer, we generally recommend a serving or a packet in this case roughly every 90 minutes. And what you really want to be mindful of when using UCAN for longer workouts is, with a sugar-based sports nutrition product, you'll refuel with it during your workout when you feel low because, boom, it's going to hit you right away. With UCAN, because it takes some time to break down, you want to be ahead of it. So if a packet of UCAN lasts you 2 hours and you're doing a 4-hour workout, you want to take that each dose of UCAN every 90 minutes, so it has about 20 to 30 minutes to break down and enter your system. You're also consuming UCAN when you're taking it during your workout over a relatively short period of time. So you're not sipping on it over the course of 40 minutes. If you're running, you might consume it over the span of a mile or two. If you're on the bike, you might consume it over the span of 10 or 15 minutes. But you really want to kind of get it in you and treat it as a food in a way, something you dose with. And then finally, you can mix it up as thick or as thin you'd like. There's no amount of water that affects how the product works. So if you're on the go, going for a long run and want to mix UCAN up real thick and make it into a gel, it works totally fine that way. Michelle, what have you done when you've made your thick UCAN gels? How have you carried it and how have you mixed it?
Yeah, so for my marathons, I'll use UCAN during, and so what I've done is I've taken the packet of UCAN. I used the orange during my last two marathons, and I'll basically like put it in a bowl and just add a little bit of water to it, so it makes it like thick like a paste. And then I actually put it in a plastic baggie, and then about that 90-minute point, I'll just kind of bite off the end of the plastic baggie and just kind of squeeze that in my mouth like I would if I was using a gel, and then I'll just chase it with a little bit of water at the next aid station because you don't have to worry about taking in, a certain amount of water. I also know people who will do that same thing. They'll take the UCAN, mix it with a little bit of water, and make a paste, and they'll put it in like a gel flask, and they'll take it in. And I usually try to take it in pretty quickly, within about, I can usually get it down within about less than 5 minutes. Yeah, and we are currently working on a more portable form of UCAN, so stay tuned for that as well.
Michelle, I'm going to give out your email address in the chat. The last thing I want to leave people with is, so we've certainly talked about implementing UCAN as part of the off season, but overall, let's say even outside of UCAN during the off season, where would you orient your clients towards in terms of thinking about their overall nutrition during times when they're not training as hard? Are there any general recommendations or takeaways that might orient people to thinking about things in the right direction as they're looking at putting together meals, at a time where they might not be training as hard?
Yeah, I feel like anytime you're not training quite as hard, I mean, even when you are training hard, I definitely like people to honor their hunger. I never want people to be feeling hungry throughout the day. So that's certainly that should tell you something needs to shift a little bit. But I always like people to have three things at meals. I want them to have a protein source. And that can be whatever. That can be, animal-based or plant-based. I tend to be a fan of the animal proteins, chicken, fish, beef, and then have a fiber source, and when you think of fiber, I always tell people, especially in the off season, like make really good friends with vegetables, have lots of vegetables, salads, vegetables are not only very low in calories, they're very high in nutrients, very high in fiber, so they're going to help keep blood sugar stable and also help you feel full and satiated. And then, have some healthy fats, whether that be oil, coconut oil, avocados. And then, as training increases, I have people add more carbohydrates, more like natural carbohydrates like sweet potatoes. But I find when people are training less, that tends to be what I pull back on a little bit. So I always make sure people have the healthy fats, the the proteins, the vegetables, and then and most of the time, even when people aren't training really high, we still have some carbohydrates in meals, and sometimes not every meal. depending on people's goals and where they're at. But in general, regardless of how you're training, I think it's a good idea to have, the proteins, the fats, and the vegetables.
And keeping your blood sugar stable, like you just said, that's we'll end where we started. That's something that, regardless of what people's goals are or what point they are at in their season, that's something that they should strive to achieve. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when your blood sugar is stable, I just can't even tell you, everything works better. Your mind is going to be better, like all your hormones are better, your cells are turning over at a correct rate, you're going to be healthier, your immune system is healthier. So much in your body, and your body was really designed to be in a stable blood sugar level. It really doesn't, it has processes when your blood sugar goes too high or too low to try to help it bump back up to that stable blood sugar level. So that's where you want to be, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're in season or out of season.
Awesome, Michelle. Well, great stuff. I put Michelle's email in the chat, but if you'd like, if for those of you that are on the phone or maybe with us on the mobile app, if you have any questions for Michelle, we covered a lot here, and certainly off-season nutrition isn't just something that can really be summed up succinctly in an hour, but hopefully we gave you at least some things to think about. For those of you that are familiar with UCAN, there's really, really, truly some great applications for UCAN outside of just using it before your long workouts. And endurance was, kind of where we started. But I think over the next year, we've got a UCAN bar on the horizon here in the next 2 months or so. And as we continue to progress with new product formats and new research, I think there'll be a lot of really compelling things that really just that will show that you can be applied as just a healthier form of carbohydrate, a carbohydrate that's going to give you the steady energy and the steady release of carbohydrate that you need, both for your brains and muscles, but that's going to do it in a form that doesn't spike your blood sugar and doesn't, shut off your ability to burn fat, doesn't cause energy swings, doesn't contribute to cravings and all the ill effects of low blood sugar and up and down blood sugar that Michelle's talked about. So I kind of got off on that tangent. What I was starting to say is, for those of you that don't have access to the chat, you can definitely get in touch with Michelle. Shoot her an email at UCANRD. That's just UCAN like the company name, RD like registered dietitian at ucanco.com. So that's a good way to email her. You can also reach out to her. I mentioned that one just because I thought it'd be easier to remember for people that can't see the chat. But Michelle just did also post her personal email in there as well, which is michelle.hearn@ucanco.com. I'm not sure actually if that went through to everybody, but I'll post Michelle's email in there as well. Either one will be a way for you to get in touch with her. Obviously, a very knowledgeable and great resource who not only talks about this stuff but lives this stuff as well. So it's, I think she could share some great personal examples with you all. Everyone's got my email because they sign up for this webinar. You're going to get a follow-up recording in your email. If you have any questions, reach out to me, reach out to Michelle. We appreciate you giving up your Tuesday night to hang out with us for an hour and 20 minutes now. So really good stuff. Appreciate everybody who stayed on the line for this entire time, which was really most of you, which is awesome. I know this nutrition stuff can be confusing at times. So, we're here not just to talk about UCAN, but we're here hopefully to be an education resource as well. And I hope that the first 15 to 20 minutes of this chat that folks learn something, outside of just how UCAN applies and UCAN fits in. But, it's so relevant what UCAN's able to do to all the things we're talking about. And even in terms of, so much newer research that's coming out in general about the ill effects of a lot of these fast acting carbohydrates and sugars and really the benefit of the moderation in carbohydrate intake and the higher fat and higher protein for a variety of health reasons. UCAN is something that fits very much in with those concepts, even with popular diets like low carb diets and paleo diets. For those of you that have tried following any of those, really at a core, a lot of those diets are oriented around controlling your blood sugar, keeping insulin low, and teaching your body to burn fat. That's exactly in a nutshell what UCAN does from a carbohydrate standpoint. So if you have any questions about how UCAN fits in with a specific diet you may be employing, that's what we're here for as well. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Fantastic audience. Great questions as always. Nobody beats the UCAN crew when it comes to that. So we thank you very much. Michelle, thanks for your time. Always a pleasure, and I learn something every time I talk to you.
Absolutely, you're very welcome. And definitely encourage people if they do have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything, nutrition related or running related. I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Michelle, have a great night. Everybody have a great night as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks.